Welcome everyone to this webinar organized by Talk Your Heart Out, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's session by Alyssa Fernandez is on common communication pitfalls that newly married couples face and what they can do about these. Indeed, the tips shared in the webinar today would also work for any couple in a long-term relationship. My name is Shilpa Jain, and I'm the founder of Talk Your Heart Out. I'm very excited to have you here and to present this webinar as part of a series of free and paid public webinars that we will be holding on a range of topics relating to mental health and personal and professional development. I wanted to start by giving you a brief introduction on Talk Your Heart Out, or TYHO for short. TYHO provides counseling services to individuals as well as couples online via video call, audio, and text-based live chat. We offer sessions after work hours and on weekends so clients can fit these amongst their other commitments. We're really proud of all our professionals who are not just well qualified and trained, but are also deeply empathetic and respectful as individuals. TYHO also works with corporates who engage us for their employee assistance programs, and we're often invited to present tailored webinars and to organize workshops for employees as well. So that was a little bit about what we do. Just a couple of house rules before we start today. Please feel free to take any photographs or screenshots during the session. If you do upload them on social media, please tag us on our respective handles given on the slide. If you have any comments, please share them in the chat box and share your questions in the Q&A box below. You can do this at any time during the webinar, even anonymously, and we'll discuss them at the end of the presentation. And now to introduce the speaker for today's webinar, Alyssa Fernandez. Alyssa has 6 years of experience in the social sector setting. She holds a master's in counseling from Monash University and is currently working as a counselor with Talk Your Heart Out. We hope that you find the topic engaging and learn a few tips that you can immediately start applying. And we hope that these save you many hours, months, or even years of unnecessary miscommunication and maybe even drama in your relationship, and ultimately allow you and your partner to build a strong foundation for a relationship to last a lifetime. At the end of the webinar, after the Q&A, we'll share some information with you on other upcoming events. We'll also share a short feedback form, and we'd be grateful if you could read this before you leave. So do stay tuned till the end. And now I'd like to hand over to Alyssa. Thank you.
Thank you, Shilpa, and thank you everyone for being here on a very rainy Saturday afternoon. Just to share a bit about myself, as a counselor, I have worked with people from all walks of life, facing all kinds of different difficulties. Just to give you a few examples, things like stress, relationship issues, anger management, grief and loss, even things like office politics, and also just making important decisions in life and wanting to seek more clarity about that. Before we begin today, I would like to start with a story. This is when I was an undergraduate in SMU many years ago. That was where I met my husband. So you know how when you go out, usually you would, there'll be doors here and there, and then usually what happens is that either one person holds the door for everyone, or everybody just takes turns holding the door for the person behind them. So that is my perspective. When I first met my husband, what he would do is that he would dash ahead, open the door, and I thought, wow, that is so nice of him. And then he would go into the room and the door would slam in my face. I mean, not physically slam in my face, but still. So it happened a few times and then a few more times. And, you know, it's a really small thing. It's like 3 seconds in my day. And of course, I am perfectly capable of holding a door on my own. But as we all know, small things can really add up. So one day we were at City Hall, and I remember there was this huge glass door. As usual, he went in, he went ahead, the door closed in my face. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to stand outside here and not enter the room. And I thought if I did that, it would be so obvious to him what was wrong. Right? I mean, anyone looking at that situation would know. Or so I thought. To my surprise, he turned around, he opened the door, and he asked me, "Oh, why are you still standing here?" So just a disclaimer, my husband is a really nice guy. He has lots of great qualities, and I definitely have habits that annoy him too. But I wonder if you've had any similar experiences whereby two people just seem to be in very different headspaces, right? It's like any message that I try to send seems to somehow be lost in translation. Sitting here today, I don't claim to be perfect, neither do I claim to have a perfect relationship. But I do think that over the years, having many conversations about the way that we talk to each other has saved us both so many years of misunderstandings, hurt, resentment, and as Shilpa said earlier, drama. Instead, I feel that I have so much more emotional capacity to focus on the things that matter more to me in life. And today, when I see that he's happy, I know that he's really happy, and I don't need to second guess whether or not there is something brewing under the surface. So I've always been very interested in communication and in the way that communication can be improved between people. I want to add that today's discussion is not about personality or character. The focus is on the behavior of how we communicate with one another. And at one point or another, we have all been guilty of some or even all of these communication pitfalls, myself included. No one is perfect, and that's why we're all here to discuss how we can improve together. There may be a lot of strategies today. You don't have to rush to apply them all. All I ask is that you listen with an open mind and see what might be relevant for you to take home. As society changes, I do want to acknowledge that there may be people who commit to lifelong commitments with each other without necessarily getting married. These communication dynamics could also be relevant for you. And if you're single and attending this webinar, you are more than welcome to be here as well. I need to add a final disclaimer that whatever we go through today, it's not going to work overnight. It takes a lot of practice, because good communication skills, they don't happen by chance. It is a lot of hard work. So with that, let me switch to my screen. Okay. All right, and let's begin. So why are we talking about this topic today, right? Why not any other topic? Why sit here for 1 hour and talk about this? Research has shown that the first 2 years of marriage predict marital fate after 13 years. In other words, the first 2 years of marriage are critical. According to Dr. John Gottman, who is a world-famous couples therapist, he says that if you do things like criticism, contempt, and stonewalling, that predicts divorce about 5 years after the wedding. And other things like emotional withdrawal, the absence of positive affect during conflict discussions, can predict divorce about 16 years after the wedding. So right now, we are going to do a poll to ask you, which of these do you struggle with? This is to see where we are at. So Shilpa, if you could help us to administer the poll, that would be great. There's no right or wrong answer here, and you can pick more than one. Shilpa, is the poll going okay?
Yes, I've launched the poll.
Oh, okay, great. That's good.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
I think we are still waiting for... okay. I think that it's hard. Some of the participants aren't seeing the poll.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't see the poll either.
You don't see the poll either?
Yeah, let me see what I can do. If any of you sees the poll, could you drop it in the chat, please, so that we know whether or not it's...
Yeah, I don't think the poll can be seen by participants.
All right, no problem.
Should we just carry forward?
Yeah, let me go on. Let me see if I can get the chat to be viewed as well. Okay. Sorry, give me 1 minute to sort this out. All right, no worries. So this is just for you to reflect on where you are at, and you can think about this on your own, even though the poll is not working. That's fine. Okay, so the next slide is, now that you've thought a bit about your struggles, how do you see yourself communicating 1 year from now and 10 years from now? This is a random example for you. So let's say it's a random Saturday afternoon in the year 2030, and there's a disagreement at home. You have two different couples handling it in two different ways. For the first couple, person A drops a few hints about the issue, and person B is happily watching Netflix. Person A then continues to sulk for the next 3 hours because the hints have not been caught. And person B later gets a very rude shock because he or she didn't know that their partner was upset. On the other hand, you have another couple who spends 15 minutes hearing each other's views, and they discuss what would be best for them as a couple. And then they spend the next 3 hours going out for a movie. So if you are just married in Singapore, I'm willing to bet that a lot of people have stopped asking you, how are you? And instead have asked you, how's married life? That is what happened for me in the first year of after being married. You might also be thinking about your living arrangements. Do you buy BTO, resale? Do you have to renovate your house? And of course, all these things will come with financial obligations as well. And there are things like household chores. You need to talk about who does what. And lifestyle issues for sure, right? If someone sleeps early and wakes up early, and someone else sleeps late and wakes up late, how are you going to navigate that? And also, we have to think about how the relationships that we have with our in-laws and our new families. And for some of us, all these things are happening on top of our workload. So it's a lot of things happening at the same time. At times, you might feel overwhelmed, lost, stuck, or maybe not sure how to go ahead with your next steps. But I want to tell you that you are definitely not alone. There are lots of people in the world going through similar experiences, and there are things that you can do about it. So common communication pitfalls can happen in different areas or different aspects of our lives. For example, in terms of how we disagree, what happens during an argument. It can also happen in terms of our expectations for ourselves, for our partners, for our marriage. And also on what it can happen in terms of what we choose to focus our attention on. So as we go through the 6 pitfalls today, I would like to invite you to think and reflect along with me on these 3 questions for each of the pitfalls that we go through. So the first question is, do I do this? Yes, no, or not sure. If you're not sure, one thing you can do if you want to find out is to ask your partner. Second one is a recent example of what I said or did. Now the keyword here is I. It's not about what your partner said or did, but what you said or did in relation to this pitfall. And the third one is, what impact did my actions have on my partner? There are 2 parts to this, according to me and according to my partner. So if you want, you can take a screenshot of this page so that you know the 3 questions. So as I was coming up with this, I did an example for myself last week. So for me, one of the things that I know I do is I interrupt my partner a lot. So do I do this? Yes. Recent example of what I said or did, I actually struggled a lot to come up with an example for this because I know that I interrupt, but I can't even think of an example. So I asked my partner, and in just 2 seconds, he gave me an example. He said that 2 days ago, he was sharing his viewpoint about politics when I interrupted midway to ask what's for dinner. So what was the impact of my actions on my partner? According to me, it was no big deal. I mean, everyone needs to talk about dinner, right? So the conversation continued. However, when I asked my partner what he felt, he said, it seemed like you didn't care what I thought about the issue, and I felt dismissed. So this was something very new to me. I never realized that my actions had such an impact on him. So the purpose of these 3 questions is to increase our self-awareness of the way that we contribute to the communication patterns with those around us. Because I think most of us, we are quite good at pointing out other people's mistakes, especially when we're angry. It's a very natural, instinctive thing to look outwards for something or someone to blame. So this is more about ourselves rather than other people. So now let's start with the common pitfalls in terms of how we disagree. The first one is making things personal. What it looks like is using a lot of you statements. You are always late, you are lazy, and words like always and never, they are absolute statements. And usually they're not accurate because if you look hard enough, you will find an exception. Lazy is name calling. It could be any variant of this. It could be you're lazy, you're stupid, why are you always so stressed? Why are you always so emotional? Why do we do this? Sometimes, like I said earlier, when we're angry, we look for someone else or something else to blame. And why it doesn't work is because no one likes being blamed. I mean, think about times when other people pointed a finger at you. It kind of kills the conversation, either that or you want to defend yourself and think of the reasons why you did what you did. And what would happen if you were to change, right? Perhaps if you did things differently, then there is a possibility of discussing the issue and the potential changes. So let's say you wanted to do things differently. How could you do that? Instead of saying you're always late, which focuses on you, the person, as a problem, you can discuss the issue rather than the person. So let's say in this case, the issue is waiting, right? So I can say something like, I feel annoyed when I have to wait because I could have done other things during that time. So here, the idea is that waiting is something that we can discuss. So another example is you're lazy or any other kind of derogatory word here. Again, the idea is that you are the problem. Instead of that, nowadays in HDB flats, one of the common issues that I see is that people on lower floors complain that the laundry of people on higher floors drips onto the dryer laundry of the people on the lower floors. So let's say you wanted to bring this up to your spouse. Instead of saying you're lazy, why don't you dry the clothes a little bit? You could phrase it as something like, perhaps we could ensure that the clothes are not dripping wet before we hang them outside. In this way, the topic that we talk about is courtesy to neighbors. Okay, so instead of making things personal, we can discuss the issue and not the person. The next one is the cold shoulder. This could be familiar to some of us. What it looks like is one person just stops talking at all costs. They just don't want to say anything. It could be in the middle of an argument when they feel overwhelmed, but it could also be, you come home one day and suddenly your spouse just went quiet and refuses to answer any of your questions and you don't know what's happening. Why people do this could be because they're overwhelmed with a lot of emotions and are not sure how to respond. And it is actually also a power play move. So the person giving the cold shoulder is trying to gain full control of the situation. It's possibly a learned behavior over time, especially if we were to grow up having watched someone do this. But why it doesn't work is because one partner is left hanging, the issue remains unresolved, and resentment may grow. Over time, resentment is a very dangerous ingredient for any relationship. So what if things were done differently? Perhaps both partners can expect that the issue will be discussed at an agreed time. So how could things be different? Instead of the cold shoulder, which sends an underlying message that something has upset me, you just have to keep guessing, I'm not going to tell you. Some couples find it helpful to implement a timeout system. A timeout system means that when everything is happy, when everything's peaceful, and this is very important, you can't do this in the middle of an argument, it will not work. So when everything is okay, you sit down and you have a conversation and perhaps say something like, okay, when we eventually have an argument, I am going to need to cool down because I know I'm very hot-headed. So I need maybe, insert whatever time, like it could be 2 hours, 4 hours, half a day, one day. Let's say it's 4 hours, I know I'll need 4 hours. So can we agree on 4 hours? We'll just take 4 hours apart, maybe in different rooms. Maybe one person is allowed to go out, but we have limits on where that is so that everyone knows that everyone else is safe. And then after that, we'll come back and we'll discuss the issue, right? So that sends a message that I'm willing to talk about it at a time that we both agree on. All right, so instead of giving the cold shoulder, which is a decision made by one person only, you could pre-discuss and mutually agree on timeouts, which keeps two people in the loop of what is happening at all times. Okay, I just want to let you know that I can see like a tiny bit of the chat, but I've moved it away for a little bit so I can see the slide. But I will get to any of these points later. Yeah. But thank you for giving your responses on the earlier poll. Yeah. So when we disagree, in summary, we might make things personal. Instead, we can discuss the issue rather than the person. And we might also give the cold shoulder, but instead we can pre-discuss and mutually agree on timeouts. So now let's move on to common pitfalls in terms of our expectations. What it looks like is something like, you should know, I shouldn't need to say it. And why we do this is sometimes when we've been in a relationship for a while, we've put in effort, we've put in time, and we have this hope that our partner knows us well. And I think that's quite understandable. But why it doesn't work is because, as many of us know, if we drop hints, if they're even noticed at all, it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And if we were to do things differently, perhaps the message that we want to get across could be clearer. So instead of saying something like, you should know what annoys me, I don't need to tell you, I could have said something like, when the door closed in my face, I felt annoyed because my perspective on door holding policy is blah, blah, blah. So this can also be a point to raise when sometimes you might have certain values or beliefs and you assume that the other person has the same values and beliefs, which may not be true. Right? So instead of expecting our partner to mind read, we can state our needs clearly. The fourth one is expecting perfection. What it looks like, it could be something like, I told you not to do that. Why did you make the same mistake again? Sometimes we are just hungry, we're stressed, we're tired. For me, I get hangry very easily. So why it's unhelpful is that no one is perfect. No situation is perfect either. And if things were done differently, perhaps there could be less stress from unrealistic expectations and more energy to do what matters to you. For example, instead of this, we could say something like, sorry for snapping at you earlier. I know I get hangry sometimes. So it's about being self-aware of the things outside of our control that could affect us, like lack of sleep, lack of food. Of course, those are not excuses to do other kinds of behavior, but at least being self-aware, we can apologize when necessary. And of course, instead of expecting perfection, we could manage our expectations. So in summary, we could state our needs clearly, and instead of expecting perfection, we could manage our expectations. So now the last category of common communication pitfalls in terms of what we choose to focus on. So what it looks like is something like, why are you so forgetful? Or why are you so fill in the blank? We do this sometimes because it's a habit learned over time, and it could be cultural factors as well. So for example, for me, I feel that growing up in Singapore has made me somewhat of a champion grumbler. I know if I see something that is worth complaining about, I know all the formal and informal ways to complain about it. So why it's unhelpful is because criticism invites defensiveness. And if things were done differently, perhaps our partners might notice their strengths a bit more and be happier about that. For example, why are you so forgetful? We could instead notice some of their strengths. For example, I noticed you were very polite and patient with the cashier, even though he made a mistake and overcharged you. So instead of being an expert at noticing someone else's weaknesses, I would challenge you to be as good or even better at noticing their strengths. The last one is taking our partner for granted. It looks something like, house chores are your duty since you work from home. But it's not necessarily true, right? Someone could be doing the house chores not because they're at home, but because of care and concern for their family. Why we do this is sometimes we're complacent. We think that our loved ones will always be around. Or at other times, it could be we just came home from a long day at work and all we want to think about is resting. So we are too busy to notice the actions of other people around us. Why it could be unhelpful is because your partner might be left wondering why they do what they do. And is there even a purpose or a need to do that, since no one is noticing? And if I were to do things differently, perhaps my partner might feel more appreciated. They might feel like there is a purpose in doing what they do. So instead of taking our partner for granted and expecting them to do certain things that just because they did it a few times, we think they should do it all the time, we could say something like, "Thank you for refilling my water bottle when you noticed that it was empty. That was very nice of you. You didn't have to, but you chose to do it." So instead of taking our partner for granted, we can find small ways to appreciate our partner. And I don't think it is, there's an upper limit for this. I think we can do many things in many small ways as often as we want, as long as it's genuine. So in summary, in terms of what we focus on, rather than focusing only on weaknesses, we can be as good or better in noticing their strengths. And instead of taking our partner for granted, we can find small ways to appreciate them. So as you hear some of these, all of these 6 pitfalls, right? Some of you might be thinking, yeah, I already knew all of that, just maybe I don't do it. So the thing is, not everyone will act on it. And why might that be the case? Here are some common reasons. It could be that partner and I don't talk about such things, it's just awkward. So if you or your partner has grown up in a home where talking about emotions is just a no, nobody talks about emotions, then expecting a change overnight is going to be quite unrealistic. It could also be a case of the problem is not big enough, so I don't see a reason to work on it because it doesn't bother me enough. For some of you, it could be that you want to start working on these things, but you're not sure where to begin. What's the first step? If so, the next slide will be for you. And the last one could be that perhaps some people are just unaware of the impact of their actions on their loved ones. Like for instance, for me, I was not aware that interrupting actually hurt his feelings. I thought it was just a normal thing. So what I want to tell you, and this is something that Shilpa likes to say, it doesn't have to get worse before you try and make it better. So now we're going to try another poll if it works. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but if not, you could just think about it, that's fine. If you could start working on one of these 6 aspects today, which would it be? So the 6 would be, let me just read them out for you in case the poll doesn't come up. The first one is
Okay, I started the poll.
Okay, is it appearing?
Let's see. I don't think it's working still.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
No problem. Yeah. So I'll just read out the 6 aspects, and you can just think about it at the back of your mind. Which one you would start on if you could. Sorry. So the first one is making things personal. The second one is giving the cold shoulder. The third one is expecting your partner to mind read. The fourth one is expecting perfection. The fifth one is noticing, being very good at noticing someone else's weaknesses. And the last one is taking your partner for granted. Right, so that's just for you to think about. But it doesn't work overnight. Or if you just try once, it takes a lot of practice, as mentioned at the beginning. So let's say you picked one, right? You've decided that, okay, I think this particular one is something that is relevant for me and I want to work on that. Then what? How do I start? If your partner is sitting here with you, or even if they're not, you can have a conversation with them about this, which is negotiating permission. So it's about making sure that both parties are comfortable with this pace. If one person is not comfortable, you might want to see how you can take maybe a step back and then work on something that is a bit easier instead. Okay, this here is just an example. Please feel free to tweak it in any way that would be more relevant for your situation. It's just a suggestion. So for example, you could say something like, if you catch me pointing out your weakness, I give you permission to ask me to name 2 of your strengths. And how about, if I see you giving the cold shoulder, do you give me permission to call it out? So this is just setting the stage so that it's setting the stage for both of you so that you're both on the same page. Right? And the second step would be action. Practice 18 to 254 days in a row. So why this unique number is because research has shown that this is how long it takes to build a habit. So that means doing the same thing for 18 to 254 days in a row, right? So you have to keep practicing in order for it to work. And it might take some trial and error, some tweaking here and there. It might not work, most likely will not work overnight. All right. So now we have reached the Q&A portion. Did we get any questions in the chat?
Yes, yeah, we've started getting some questions, yeah. So thank you so much, Alyssa, for the presentation. It was the most insightful. So I have been married for 5.5 years now, and I still found that some of these tips would help me today if I started applying them. We have about 20 minutes for questions, and there are like a few in the Q&A box. And so I'll read out the questions for everyone's benefit. And Alyssa, you can address them. The first question here is, I don't have a particularly good relationship with my in-laws. Sometimes there are things I feel I'm not comfortable with in relation to my in-laws, but I'm not sure how to bring it up. So I don't bring it up and just get through it silently. How can we improve communication with our in-laws? So it sounds like this may be affecting their marriage. What would you say to that?
I think this is such a hot topic for people who have just been married. It's thank you for bringing that up. I think it's a really good question, very relevant for a lot of us nowadays. It's tricky, right? Because it's entering this new territory that none of us have experience in. And I think a lot of cultural factors will come into play as well. Things like respect your elders. You know, so if we have if we disagree on certain opinions or certain things, how comfortable are we really to share that difference in opinion? I think that would be a struggle for a few of us. I would wonder though, because communication with in-laws is quite broad. So I would wonder what kind of specific area, is there a specific area that this person would want to improve communication in? Like for example, is it a case of you live in the same household and you just have differences in your living habits and that's something that makes you uncomfortable? Or is it a case of, say, you live in different houses, but your in-laws maybe have the keys to your house and they drop by anytime they want? Or maybe it's expectations. Like I think a lot of us at special occasions will be asked, oh, when are you going to have a child? When are you going to have a next child? You know, so I would think being specific about what exactly affects you in terms of communication with your in-laws would be something that you might want to think about. And then something that's quite important is also having a conversation with your spouse about it. You know, your spouse knows his family, his or her family very well. So I think it's good to have a discussion together and then to share your thoughts. And if you do decide at the end of the day to bring it up to your in-laws, perhaps you might want to discuss when's a good time, when's a good opportunity, given what your spouse knows about their family as well, in terms of how they operate. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it did. I think it's always a tricky one, this one. Like you said, like, one of the big aspects of like transitioning into married life.
Yeah.
The second question that's here is, what if I'm okay to work on some of these things, but my partner is not willing to talk about them? So I'm guessing it's like the six different pitfalls that you talked about.
Right. Yeah. I think it's very common to have one partner be more willing than another partner to work on these things. And it can be quite frustrating and tiring if you're the one who feels like, you know, you are the one always putting in the effort, you're always the one trying. And it seems like the other person is not doing much. So at the back of my mind, I would wonder if there are any specific reasons why the partner or spouse might not want to talk. So could it be that, for example, growing up, I think one of the cultural factors I mentioned earlier is that if growing up they were just used to a family that does not talk about any emotions, then expecting this to change overnight is just not going to happen, right? So, but even then, even if that is the case, it is still the partner's choice whether or not they want to talk, to be honest. So we can't really control what other people want or don't want to talk about. So I would think that what is within this person's control would be to be aware of your own boundaries. So I would ask myself, at what point can I look back and say, I have done all that I can do and the rest is really not up to me. But that being said, I think there are times where we've seen changes start from one person. And I think in this, there are a few examples earlier in the pitfalls where there are some of the things that don't require negotiating permission or don't require both parties to discuss. So, for example, appreciating your partner or just trying to look out more for their strengths and affirm them for it. I think those are things that you can start with as one person. And then you can always look out and see if your partner notices the differences and how they respond to that.
Yeah, completely. So control the controllables to start with and see.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. The next question here is, my husband's best friend, so it got sent twice. Anyway, my husband's best friend likes to point out other people's flaws and that they find it irritating. He does this frequently at social gatherings and it pisses me off. I don't understand why he can't see that it's not nice. How do I make him stop?
I'm sorry, this is the husband's best friend.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think the same thing applies where we can't control other people, and I know this is probably not what you want to hear to the person who's asking the question, but you really can't control other people's behaviors. But however, I do think, again, it does come down to what are the things that you can control, right? Control the controllables. So for example, if you are close to him, I'm not sure how close you would be to your husband's best friend, but if you are close to him, you could always test water and see whether or not you could bring up the issue to him. Something like, there has been something that's bothering me. I want to bring it up, but I'm not sure if you're okay if I bring it up. And you can see how comfortable this person is to receive feedback. That's one option, to actually go and talk about it with them. Or the other way is to accept that they will be like that. And then just think about, when this happens again, it annoys me, right? What can I say or do at that very moment that could help me cope better with that situation? Yeah. And I mean, and if you're not that close to them, you could always consider, the husband's best friend, right? Not her best friend. So you could always consider slowly moving away and not hanging out as much with them. Yeah. So that is an option as well. So it's just about going through all the different options that you can do and see what you want to do based on those.
Yeah. I guess this question is coming out of that, like, need. Sometimes we feel that, if that we should try and be as close to our husband's friends as they are, or
yeah
that could be one. All right, let me go on to the next one here. So there's another question on sorry, it's kind of related to the previous one, so I'll move on to the next one. Sometimes when arguing with my husband, I feel so frustrated, I don't really know how to respond. It's like I can't think straight. What can I do during such a heated emotional argument?
That's a tough one. I think it does come down to managing your own expectations as well, because not every issue can be solved immediately. So it is also about recognizing if something is going to take more time, either because of the nature of the issue itself, or sometimes it's just about our emotions, right? Like if we get so heated, I think the word was heated, right? And there's a lot of emotions, then it could be good to just take some time apart, a few hours or something, and just cool down and then come back to it again. That's perfectly fine. But during such an argument, I would think that something I would ask myself is, what is more important to me, this relationship or being right? And I've always believed that you don't have to agree with someone in order to love them. Yeah. I hope that helped.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah. So the next question here is, I'm curious about what is couples counseling like?
Right. Okay. I think there are two parts to this question. What is counseling and what is couples counseling? So I'm not sure if everyone here knows about counseling, so I'll just explain a bit about what is counseling. A lot of people think that it is about giving advice, like a counselor gives advice and tells you, okay, in relationship to this problem, you have to do this. But that can't be further from the truth. So I like to use this metaphor that your thoughts and emotions are sometimes like spaghetti. They're just really messy on a plate. And what a counselor might do is to try to help you sort through the pile a bit, maybe pull out one strand, untangle a bit here and there, and then let you look at the strand more closely. And then you can decide for yourself what you want to do. So it's more of giving you more self-awareness and clarity about your situation. So back to your question about couples counseling, right? There are lots of things that can happen in couples counseling. It really depends on the goals of the particular couple. And maybe just to give you a glimpse, a small example of one of the things we could do is, let's say, look at the communication patterns between a couple, and then see how we can shift the unhelpful patterns to be more helpful. So, for example, let's say a couple falls into this pattern of one person criticizes, the other person defends, and then it goes on and on in that cycle. And it could be either person who is doing either role at any time. So we might then look at this couple's history of communicating together. Were there other times where they had more helpful communication patterns? And we might want to draw those out. Let's say if the couple had this pattern of apologizing coupled with forgiving, but they stopped doing that a long time ago, we might draw that out and try to build it up again. Yeah, so that's just one small example of something we might do in couples counseling.
Yeah, that was helpful. Then the next question is, I feel like some people think emotional affairs are no big deal because people say things like, there was nothing physical and you're just friends, but it still affects us as a couple. How can someone recover from emotional affairs? What is an emotional affair?
Right, so an emotional affair is, so everyone knows what a physical affair is. An emotional affair is one that does not involve physical contact. So it's more like, it could look a lot like friendship on the surface, but you find yourself depending more and more on this person. You feel a very strong emotional connection to this other person. And there's a certain aspect of secrecy as well, that you don't want to tell your partner about it. So it could just be like, let's say you're having lunch with a colleague very often and it's just the two of you, and you know that when there's something that happens to you, you want to tell this person first and not your spouse. And it could go from like occasional texting to everyday texting to all day texting. Yeah, so it is a very slippery slope and it can be hard to recognize sometimes. And sometimes it reaches a stage where even you start to compare this other person with your spouse, and then you see your spouse in more of a negative light. Sorry, so I answered the part about I didn't answer the second half of your question, right?
Okay, so the second half was that it still affects them as a couple, and how do you then recover from emotional affairs if that happens in a relationship?
Right. I think a lot of it is similar to recovering from a physical affair. The worst thing that you could say in such a situation is that it's no big deal. There was nothing physical. Because sometimes the effects of an emotional affair on a couple can be worse or similar to the effects of a physical affair. In either case, something was missing in the relationship and someone tried to look for those missing elements elsewhere. So if the question is about recovering from it, I think it's very similar to physical affairs. So you would need to cut off that affair, cut off contact with that person, and be very open and honest with your spouse to rebuild that trust that might have been lost. And to include your spouse on every step of this journey of cutting off contact and things like that. I do know in some cases you can't cut off contact because, let's say, they're co-workers, and in those scenarios very strict boundaries have to be put in place, and you might want to keep your spouse in the loop about that as well. So you're
saying it could be as like damaging, I guess, to a relationship
Exactly. Yes.
So the next question that I'd like to ask you is, how do you manage financial budget among couples?
So finances is a very tricky topic, right? Everyone has to talk about it, and it is the cause of so many breakups. I think the same thing applies when talking about any difficult topic. It's just about being very open and honest and sharing your concerns there isn't a right or wrong way to handle a budget. I think what matters is that both of you are aware of what the other person is concerned about, what their feelings are about it as well. So I think if you come from a standpoint of wanting to understand where the other person is at, it would be a lot smoother a discussion than if you were to just talk about the numbers.
Yeah. That makes sense. Like amongst my friends as well, everyone has such different ways of managing
Exactly.
budget, but it can be like a thorny issue.
It is. Yeah.
Next question. So there's some questions in the chat box as well. I might like go to them first and then come back to the Q&A box. A question in the chat box is, how can the LGBT community fit into Singapore's closed-minded community?
Yeah, it is really, really tough. I know of people in the community who struggle with this, and some who are a lot more, what's the word that I should use? They've gotten used to it in a way. I think it's very hard to say to fit into a society, because again, we can't control how the society is going to perceive anyone really. And we can't control how close-minded or open-minded the rest of society is. So I think if we wait for people to be open-minded, we are going to struggle a lot. Yeah, so I think if it were me, I would focus more on the people around me. How can I feel by the ones who do accept me? And I would also ask myself, how important is it that everyone else accepts me? And also, is that realistic? Because not just for the LGBTQ community, but it's for anyone at all. I don't think any one of us can get the whole of society to support, to, in a way, I don't know how to explain this, but it's like no one would be entirely approved by society, if you get what I mean. Yeah. I hope I answered the question. I mean, that's what I think. Yeah,
absolutely. And hopefully with time, things get like more open, and we find the acceptance for our LGBT community as well.
Yeah, like I would love the acceptance for that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. More questions.
Yes.
Again, in the chat box, should awareness and education on marriage, not just dating and relationships, start from school, assuming marriage is one of the end goals in mind?
Yeah, I know I said this about so many questions, but I think it's tricky because marriage is a concept that is influenced by so many different things, even values and religion. So a lot of people have different views on it. So if it comes into school, then the question would be, whose values are we teaching? And I'm not saying this as I support any side or another, but I do like the idea of communication, awareness and education starting early. But in terms of marriage, I think it would be a bit more tricky. Yeah, because, but I think things like, how do you be more compassionate to others? How do you listen more actively? All these things that help communication, I think they're great skills to include in a school syllabus.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, not everyone, because that's assuming that everyone does think that marriage is one of the end goals in mind, but yeah, that might not be the case.
Yeah, but I think that is a really good question. Thank you for asking it. Yeah.
Okay. Another question here. So, okay, one more question. I'm in a relationship, but I'm not very good with communication. I try my best to change, but I'm very tired now that I have been thinking of ending the relationship, and my boyfriend seems to change how he is along the way, and it is so fast I can't catch up.
The question is, sorry?
So I think, I guess the person is struggling a little bit with how fast her boyfriend is changing. And because I guess like you always have to kind of, catch up. And so she's struggling with that. So I think she might be asking for tips.
Okay, sure.
How to like manage that. Yeah.
Thank you for being open enough to share. I think it does take some courage to share about your situation, and I want to thank you for that. Yeah, it can be tiring if someone changes a lot very fast, because you have to keep adapting, especially if you're someone who, like for me, I'm not a big fan of change. I like, I find comfort in familiarity. So it is quite tiring. I would also wonder how that changing affects you, like specifically. And would there be anything that you can do to help yourself to relax, for example, to take time to do what you love? And sorry, the first half of the question was something about she wants to communicate better. She or he wants to communicate better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah.
And she's trying her best to change, or he, is trying their best to change.
Right. Yeah.
But
I think.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. I think it's great that you see a need for constant improvement. That is, and you thought of ending the relationship. I would, however, if I were you, I would ask myself very clearly, like, what exactly is the reason for ending the relationship? Is it because I'm tired of constant self-improvement, or is it because of something in the other person that I feel is not something within my control? Yeah. So if it is a case of I'm tired because I'm constantly doing self-improvement, or I'm constantly the one working on communication, I would say that working on communication is something you would have to do in any relationship. So, even if it's a different person, you might end up back in the same boat, which is why I think it's important to know the exact reason for yourself, why you want to leave the relationship, if you do. Yeah.
I've got a follow-up question on the LGBTQ one.
Yeah. Sure.
And the question is, how do you cope with parents not accepting? How do you cope with parents not accepting you?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really tough, because parents it's not like, they are society or friends where you can decide to, just kind of move away for a little bit. They are your parents, and you would care about their opinion for sure.
Yeah.
And it can be very, very hurtful if, your parents are people you want approval from, you want their love. And when they don't accept you, it can be super difficult. So I think it's tough. It's really, really tough. And you never know if your parents will or will not accept it in the end. It could be a lifelong conversation that just stays hanging. So I know this is hard to hear, but I think acceptance that some people may never accept it can be something that is quite powerful, even though it's very difficult. I know it's easier said than done. Yeah.
So I've got the last question that's unanswered right now. It says, we started to argue more after we had our first child. We have very different opinions on how to raise our child. Do you have any suggestions on how to discuss this with my partner?
On how to raise the child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is very common to experience communication difficulties right after having a child for the first few years. That is a very, very common concern. I think the same communication rules would apply. The difference here is that you would probably be super busy 24/7 because you have a child. I personally am not a parent, so I can't say much about parenting specifically, but I think in terms of communication, it is the same few things. It is coming back to trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand where they're coming from. And one thing that I have found very helpful is to constantly come back to asking, you can come up with a question that suits your relationship, but it's coming back to the idea that both of you are on the same page about wanting this marriage to work, about wanting, for example, for a lot of parents, the motivation to communicate well is the child. They want the child to grow up well. They want the child to model good communication skills. So I think to constantly remind yourselves of the things that put you on the same page, caring about the marriage, wanting it to last, things like that. Yeah. So I think when you start from there, then you can do things like you can do active listening skills, for example, to hear where the other person is coming from. Yeah, rather than just trying to get your own viewpoint across. Yeah, and then you can open up a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alyssa. And thank you so much to the participants for all your great questions. I just wanted to, sorry, just a second. I'm going to start sharing my screen and start concluding today's webinar.
So I think there's one comment Thank you for the yeah. Marital education can begin from home. As parents, we can role model how we handle conflicts and disagreements. Exactly. Fully agree with that. Thank you for your comment. Yep. Sorry, Shilpa, you were saying.
Oh, no, sorry, I missed that one. So I just wanted to thank everyone again. I am going to share my screen quickly. Can you see my screen, Alyssa?
Yeah, I can.
Great. Yes, so thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. The sun has come out to reflect on how to build a stronger relationship with your partner. If you have liked today's session or have any feedback at all on how we could have done better, please let us know on the link in the chat box. It will help us greatly. And if you would like to continue chatting with Alyssa, either individually or as a couple on a personal issue that she can help with, please visit www.talkyourheartout.com to book a session with her. So at Talk Your Heart Out, we are keen on building a community of people passionate about sharing ideas and learning how to deal with life's challenges and ultimately live our best lives. We will continue to host free and paid webinars and workshops, and we would love for you to join us again on a topic that interests you. As you fill up the feedback form, I wanted to also quickly talk about a couple of events that are coming up. Alyssa is holding a 2.5-hour public webinar at these 3 times on the slide on how to support someone going through an emotional difficulty. As we would have all experienced at some point, it is not easy to deal with someone you care about going through a difficult period. It can be confusing, it can be messy, and it can even be painful. On top of all of this, it's not, you may not always know what the right things to say are. So join Alyssa for the webinar if you would like to find out more. We've also got an upcoming workshop by Edmund Chong. So he's holding a 4-week online group workshop for 8 to 12 participants on how to take charge of your life. So this workshop is primarily designed for working professionals who may find themselves stuck in monotony, and they may observe that they move through their days on autopilot mode, performing one task after another without a sense of fulfillment. The workshop is aimed to help participants design a life with purpose, one that is aligned with their core values and inner motivations. So if you would like to attend either of these workshops, please email us at contact@talkyourheartout.com. We'll also send detailed information on the events via email. So thank you once again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead. Please do leave us your feedback if you haven't already. Thank you.